Rise of the neutral company. Politics as the exercise of collective power against human opposition. This new idea of corporate neutrality, as lately invented by perhaps the two most different high-profile companies in Silicon Valley, Coinbase and Basecamp, is, for once, new. It means something. It might even mean more than it knows it means. I had been toying with this idea myself for a few years, and even kind of practiced it. But I couldn't get past the fact that I was the wrong person to invent it. I have a lot of drafts on the subject, but frankly, Coinbase and Basecamp said it better. The spirit of neutrality is simple. No politics at work. The details are full of devils. What is politics, actually? Is it campaigning for a candidate? The election definition remains an old-fashioned piece of workplace etiquette, and misses most of politics today. Any effective neutrality policy must define politics in the broadest, most philosophical sense. Politics is the exercise of collective power against human opposition. Building a dam is not politics, because it is collective power against natural forces. Deciding to build the dam is politics, because no dam is in everyone's interest, implying some human opposition that the pro-dam collective must overcome. In today's official language, when we talk about elections, we say politics. When we talk about politics, which is power, we talk about impact. We talk about changing the world. We talk about mattering. Who doesn't want to matter, make an impact, or perhaps even change the world? Not that anyone can do any of these things on their own, only as part of a movement, a party, an affinity group, a collective. So politics is human collective action, against humans. There is no politics without an enemy. The essential distinction in politics is between friend and enemy. In theory, we could imagine spontaneous collective action without a human enemy. The picking up trash by the freeway party. After a hot day volunteering, this joyous party will be thinking dark thoughts about litter bugs. After a week, they'll be ready to spray for them. Politics is a special case of war. War is a human universal. The military mind as a default feature. So a workplace is neutral if no one in the office is trying to change the world. Except, of course, by just doing their jobs. They can try to change the office, but such changes can have no reference to the world, just to the office itself. If they are soldiers in one of today's political armies, which is fine, they must leave their flags and uniforms at home. When we imagine an office in Northern Ireland which must employ both Protestants and Catholics, we imagine a very simple and easy to enforce, no troubles in the office, policy. In the neutral workplace, you are at your professional best if no one can even guess, except by superficial linguistic, cultural, national and/or racial affinities, all of which are unreliable. How you would want to change the world. Or if you think it's fine the way it is, which is fine, too. And if people can guess, which is sometimes unavoidable, well, at least you can refrain from reminding them. Whatever your polarity, always hide your power level at work, even if everyone at work already knows your power level. How hard is that? The practical ethos of the neutral workplace is, don't ask, don't tell, but for politics. Anyone who can otherwise remain professional in a professional situation can master this black art of political neutrality. Anyone who can't is a prima donna. Prima donnas have their place, even in the office. But no opera needs more than one prima donna. Some do better with none. And if you have to ask whether you can get away with being a prima donna. The Zen of neutrality. Neutrality is like Zen. A practice, not a belief. You don't have to believe in Zen to do it. Once you learn to do it, though, it is not unlikely that you will start believing in it. The resemblance is not a coincidence. The essential principle of Zen or any Buddhism is the conquest of desire. Neutrality is the conquest of desire for power, for the sense, authentic and unforgeable, of individual participation in collective victory which past generations would have been unashamed to call glory. Humans are a social and military species. The desire to matter, make an impact and maybe even change the world is as innate as the sex drive, and almost as fundamental, and almost as easy to manipulate with artificial stimuli. A policy of workplace neutrality just says you can't express your power drive at work. You already can't express your sex drive at work. This policy does not require you to be celibate or asexual. It does not even try to ask you to be opposed to sex. It just asks you, politely and reasonably, not to be sexual within this time and place. Even if you are a promiscuous swinger or a passionate activist, obeying this physical rule forces you to learn to control your desire, if only in one situation. This in turn grants you a small and incomplete taste of life beyond desire, literally, nirvana. Keep sucking on this straw, and it turns into a hose. You realize that every thought you have, every story you know, about the true story of the world today, is saturated with importance. This artificial glory drug, or pornography of power. Or intellectual MSG. Every idea comes soaked in the salted corn syrup golden sauce of changing the world. Everything you believe is an evolved expression of desire. But you're still changing the world, aren't you? If the collective action is good, and it can be good, surely, sure. But, we don't see that much in practice. Look a bit deeper, and you see the ugly side of everything. The trouble is, once you become a rocket-powered cocaine god, you are anything but ready to solve some kind of complex moral calculus trolley problem. Which is exactly what you need to solve, if you want to make sure your impact is actually positive. Or even exists, in reality, at all. But, if you are not doing the math, it is very likely that your collective impact is objectively negative and counterproductive. True. Cocaine still has medical uses. False. You should be prescribing it for yourself. If someone does prescribe it for you, he should be a doctor. He should not be on cocaine. His prescription should be motivated by a reasonable and scientific analysis of your health, not by a romantic ideal, a financial adventure, or a sex fantasy. When you try to change the world and your motivation is intoxication with desire, usually what will happen is nothing. Usually nothing is the best thing that can happen. Less often, but still quite often, you will harm yourself or others. Rarely, you will even do something good. And almost always, you will serve the powers that be, and this is true whether your polarity is left or right. Once you decide that the baseline of collective political action is folly, the attraction of philosophical neutrality, not mere refraining from collective action in one place and time, but refraining even from ideas and stories evolved to motivate collective action, is the attraction of intellectual fine dining that isn't soaked in political corn syrup. At the start of this exercise in abstinence from desire for power, every idea on your plate will taste sour, harsh, bitter, and dry. At the end, you won't even need to butter your pancakes. The palate always adjusts. Aristotle on corporate governance. If neutrality is spiritually good for you, it remains professionally good for your employer. This is why these extremely smart companies would make this kind of painful move, which for both resulted in substantial employee attrition. Aristotle said a lot about governance but nothing about corporate governance. Aristotle never knew what a corporation is. Aristotle never even grabbed a doppio at Starbucks. But we can reuse Aristotle's simple taxonomy of monarchy, oligarchy and democracy in the 21st century C-suite. A monarchy is a company which is managed by its CEO. An oligarchy is a company which is managed by its employees. A democracy is one which is managed by its customers. It should be unnecessary to state that with rare exceptions, all functional companies, big or small, are monarchies. While mere input from employees and customers is often valuable, any variety of corporate oligarchy or democracy is almost always a human zoo. One struggles to imagine the toppings at democratic pizza, let alone the dough. One of the banal phenomena behind woke capital is the office Slack or equivalent. Basecamp, famous for a similar tool, knows all too well what Balrog its delvings woke. Speaking as a former CEO, here is what all CEOs should know. It turns out that letting your employees express themselves, on any and all subjects, in any and all internal chat rooms, is not just a strong way to promote bonding, culture and communication. Said chatroom is also a great on-site for a tennis court oath. Quite inadvertently, your general Slack becomes a sort of parliament, a stage where loud voices compete to proclaim, condemn, demand and denounce. You have invented the oligarchical form of government. You, the CEO, are cast as Louis XVI in this play. Having fun yet? It is easy to calculate that a public action which satisfies both the company's internal activists and the external journalists who report on the company would be doubly in the company's interest. However, this calculation would be incorrect, since neither of these groups is generally motivated by outcomes, rather, by power. If they were motivated by outcomes, conceding their demands would mollify them. Satisfied, they would disband or at least dwindle. But if they are motivated by power, we would expect concessions to make them louder, hungrier, and more aggressive. This is probably why Basecamp flipped. The actions it thought were solving the problem were making it worse, and its leadership seems to have figured that out. This would be a rare, but not unheard of, recovery of monarchical initiative. When the monarchical power tosses a bone to the oligarchical power, we would expect this to strengthen the oligarchical power and make it more aggressive, not to calm and weaken it. Such a bone might be control over some irrelevant, symbolic, publicly facing policy decision. Throwing this bone does not set the dogs to eating. It sets the wolves to howling. Wolves aren't stupid. They know there are more bones where this one came from. The more a wolf gets, the more a wolf will want, and man is wolf to man. Once this chatroom parliament, the word parliament literally means chatroom, is given power on a symbolic issue outside the company. It is only a matter of time before it demands sovereignty over substantive issues within the company, which has now become unmanageable. At least on certain subjects, and that set of subjects will tend to widen. Yet no such parliament is an island. The chat parliaments of different companies will not disagree. All are antennas for one prevailing power, sails to catch one uniform political wind. The parliament thus becomes the ideological agent of this total power, within the firm. The role of the party commissar, which also existed in both the Third Reich and the USSR. And exists in China today. If nothing at all about this universal ideology, this marketplace of idea, was wrong. If it was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This or any mechanism of oligarchical governance would be foreign to the nature of management. Decisions should never be made communally if possible. Such decisions are unaccountable. In all well-shaped organizations, power is accountable. The design hack in the modern joint stock company is that the CEO has authority over all other staff, and all other staff are accountable to the CEO, and the CEO is accountable to the board. But the board has no authority to manage the CEO. The board can only replace the CEO, which keeps them, or the shareholders behind them, from micromanaging the company and turning it into another kind of oligarchy. Yet everyone in an operational role is fully accountable. The nature of oligarchy is essentially foreign to good governance, because it dissipates accountability. It is not even clear who is in charge. Positions of leadership in the chat parliament are an unpredictable, informal consequence of personal charisma. Power's flow has changed its regime. It was laminar, it is now turbulent. Responsibility flowed smoothly up to the CEO, authority smoothly down. Now power flows into a social media parliament and disappears in a fog. Needless to say, this fog of power is not accountable to anyone or anything. By banning politics, broadly defined, from internal chats and meetings, the company intercepts the emotional energy that gets this transition started. The parliament does not create its own internal power. The CEO only fears and respects it because of its power to channel external powers that are outside the company and above it. And the form of this channel is politics, collective action against human opposition. Unconditionally block all forms of politics, and all this ends. The power of the powerless. But what if we learn to do this just as pretend, then decide we like it? When we teach ourselves to meditate away our thymos, our instinctive desire to matter, not just concealing it 9 to 5, neutralizing it 24/7, What changes? What happens when we are no longer Democrats or Republicans, Protestants or Catholics, Marxists or fascists, when we accept that we are all subjects, who cannot change the world at all, who do not matter and cannot make an impact? On its face, this is a condition of powerlessness. So it is. It is also one of great power. It is this power of the powerless that any gesture of neutrality, even a superficial gesture, like an employee code of conduct, can at least begin to teach. When you take one step toward Zen, Zen takes 2 steps toward you. Once we meditate away our thymos, once we learn this Zen, what can we concretely do? What is the power of the powerless? If we, focus our energy, what can we do? Levitate the Washington Monument? Well, kind of. The political animal. Most people obviously interpret any calculated renunciation of power as a gesture of surrender. The mindset of a citizen, who believes in his power over his government, even a tiny fraction of power, even no power at all, just the symbol of power, just the hope of power, is quite different from the mindset of a subject, who accepts that he has no power at all, and has ceased to struggle, like a rabbit in the jaws of a wolf. Never struggle. Struggling is terrible. Hitler called his book, My Struggle, and you see where it got him. Anything that's struggling is almost ready to die. But still, the citizen says, why not struggle? It might work. What else could? And the rabbit agrees. Struggling is an instinctive response. The citizen, abused by a broken regime which has also confiscated his quantum of power and turned him into a subject, is instinctively indulging his thymos. His instinctive desire to matter and be powerful. Like Lincoln's Lyceum despot, of the family of the lion, or the tribe of the eagle, to which he still in his lizard brain thinks he belongs, distinction will be his paramount object. Distinction is not the object of the rabbit, or the subject. This object is survival. Your goal, as the subject you are, is not to rule, it is to be well ruled. If you assume that your only way to be well ruled is to rule, well, then, all means struggle for power. But if this is not the only way, or if it is not a way at all, to live is first to think. To think is to plan. To plan is to begin nowhere but where you actually are. The rabbit who wants to survive the wolf's jaws should not struggle instinctively. The rabbit should plan consciously. The opposite of struggling is planning. Rational action, performed collectively but planned coherently. For example, the wolf might be more careless with a rabbit it thinks is dead. The instinctive human desire to matter will not go away. It may even be useful. Even fear can be useful on the battlefield. But like any emotion, it is only useful when under conscious control. Practicing office neutrality might even teach people that control, at least, we can dream. To borrow an idea from Frank Herbert, the difference between 20th century politics and any possible meaningful 21st century politics is that the 20th century voter is a political animal, operating purely on animal instincts and desires. These instincts and desires are clearly recognizable in our cousin, the chimpanzee. In the 21st century, our animal spirits are in sad decline. Any strategy for collective action that depends on resurrecting the chimp elan in the 21st century, last man, is a non-starter. I'm sorry, but any kind of success requires staying out of these dead ends. Some want to build virtual cloud countries. What country was ever a country that no one was willing to die for? What is a cloud country but a mailing list? Who ever died for a mailing list? Or a subreddit? Some want to build charter cities or other physical enclaves stocked with digital nomads. Charter cities kind of exist and digital nomads definitely do. Show me a city of nomads, or more philosophically, monads, since even the Golden Horde had their clans and tribes, their cousins and their uncles, and I'll show you a rope of sand. Mere social, economic, or even physical proximity, which is all you get from a mailing list, a tax haven or an Airbnb nation, generates almost no chimp energy at all. The human fuel you're feeding into this feeble engine is our atomized, monodic, apathetic, last man. Does this seem like the recipe for a successful rocket launch? Any plan which depends on harnessing instinctive political desire, whether it is an 18th century plan to restore the republic or a 21st century plan for crypto republics, cannot identify as a plan until it is willing and able to solve this engineering problem, which it cannot solve, because the motor is weak, and the fuel is weaker. You must chimp. You are no chimp, and cannot chimp. There is no way out of the vice. The political human. A plan for collective action which depends not on harnessing desire, but escaping it, can be much more effective, because its tactics are not restricted to instinctive emotional action. For example, there are two kinds of flash mob, the kind that looks all too much like a chimpanzee ambush, and the kind where 50 musicians in tuxes randomly walk into a train station and start playing a Mahler symphony. The problem with animal motivation is that everyone's animal instinct pulls them in a slightly different direction. Everyone who wants to change the world, to the left and to the right, though much more to the right, wants to change it in a slightly different way. They all want to take and use power. They all want to wear the ring, and no two of them would do exactly the same thing. And that's why they're a mob, not a symphony. And that's why they can't collectively levitate the Washington Monument. It is completely impossible for any civilized government to resist, or even harm, any non-trivial subset of the population capable of planned human collective action. Once you stop struggling individually and follow a coherent plan, you are 100 times stronger. 100-watt light bulb as an appliance, 100-watt laser as a weapon. Without the animal spirits of old, our only choice is to act collectively as humans. For example, suppose Trump had persuaded all of his 75 million voters to install an app that let him direct their movements, to travel to wherever they were told, and from there, walk wherever their phone told them to walk. Just to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard, of course, to show strength and be strong. With this level of cohesive planning, it would not take 75 million people to take over the government. 7.5 million would be more than enough. 750,000 might be enough, even 75,000. But no such structured crowd could exist as a crowd of leaders. By definition, since its members mechanically follow a central plan, it is a crowd of followers. Having set aside their political desire, these followers have set aside their will to act as individuals. This is why they are willing to just walk wherever their phone tells them to walk. However big this crowd of followers, it would not be taking power. It would have to be giving power. The crowd would not be electing Trump as their agent to follow their collective will, but as their ruler to enact his personal will. After their victory, they would not be jostling for a piece of the pie. They would not be jockeying him to make sure he lived up to his promises. They would go home, forget about politics, and even delete the app. The collective goal of the crowd was to give absolute power to their leader. Once given absolute power, no leader needs a crowd. After all, he has the army and the police. The humans in this crowd, acting on reason and not emotion, would see democracy as a tool, not a vision. They would see that democracy is most effective as a transient force, used to transition from one absolute, non-democratic authority to another. This transient spirit implies a crowd that can follow. A crowd of leaders cannot give power, because their animal desire attaches them to power. A crowd of followers, political eunuchs, cured of this desire, can pass the baton of power like a feather. When a crowd of leaders, motivated by animal spirits, delegates power, their delegation is weak. The power always comes with conditions. The crowd is always implicitly threatening to take it back. So the delegate, too, is weak. When a crowd of followers, obeying a collective plan, delegates power, the delegation is unconditional. So power is actually transferred, and the delegate is strong. And the difference between a leader and a follower is this detachment from emotional ambition, this clear pill. No one who wants to lead, or who is not fully in control of their desire to lead, can follow properly. Collectively, followers are more powerful. So the art of detachment, professional detachment, ironic detachment, even apathetic detachment, is actually an art of war. It is just not the art everyone is looking for. The 20th century's political castration of the population, which has strengthened our institutional oligarchy by distancing it from the politicized democracy of the past, has weakened the oligarchy by bringing it closer to the apolitical monarchy of the future. The oligarchy will fall with a slight push, but only a push in the opposite direction. An elephant cannot push it back. A child could push it forward. Caesar was the candidate of one faction, the populares. Through him, the populares did not in any way take power. Their support gave him power. Neither Caesar nor his heir Augustus was the emperor of the populares. Both were emperors of Rome. In fact, the Roman conflict of the orders, the class war that under different names had lasted 4 centuries or so, ends with the Caesars and is never heard from again. So, of course, do Rome's civil wars. At least our civil wars are all cold, but imagine America without any kind of cold race war, or cold class war, or cold culture war. How do you think those Americans would look back on the way we live now? Vote for Caesar, and you might find out. The Romans found out, and the Pax Augusta decisively discredited Roman democracy. While his successors soon declined, his reign had made the point, and the Rome of the 5 good emperors, from Nerva to Marcus Aurelius, proved it for all time. After Augustus, the demos of the Respublica was permanently neutered and never again mattered. The last emperor who even tried to organize a sham street election was, of all emperors, Caligula. This was taken as seriously as you might expect. Yet demotic politics played a central role in the phase transition of the Roman polity, an essential phase transition that preserved Rome, if imperfectly, for centuries. Again, democracy is best seen, and best used, as a transient force. The inevitable hamburger nation. But lest anyone panic or exult, this is hardly where we are. Trump is not the perfect king and has no resemblance to Caesar, Napoleon, Lee Kuan Yew or Peter the Great. And his supporters are even farther from being perfect followers. I do think Trump as absolute monarch would be better than the regime we have now. I have a pretty low opinion of the regime we have now. But I would still install the app. Trump is what the smart people say he is, and also what the dumb people say he is. As the smart people say, he is a superficial, incompetent grifter. As the dumb people say, he is basically a good guy with common sense. Trump is the perfect brother-in-law. While real Trump voters are generally wonderful people, they think like faithful citizens, not like neutral subjects. They see Trump as their agent, he is working for them. They are not giving him power. Through him, they are taking power. Anyone who is not beyond programs, issues, or platforms, anyone who thinks about what he wants to make the government do, is not yet beyond this sad world of political samsara. They are 20th century political animals, fueled by animal spirits, not at all like Spock. They are not a crowd of followers. They are a crowd of leaders. To them, that's what democracy means. You exercise your right to power and use it to make the government serve you. Like it's supposed to. In a way they are not wrong. In every way, they are 100% light bulb and 0% laser. The regime can relax. Of course, to the extent that Trump is an imperfect agent, and even if all they watch is Fox, his voters cannot avoid seeing his imperfections. This renders their support for him limited. Contingent and conditional. They seldom realize just how conditional it is, and just how weak that conditionality makes him, and through him them. But most of the conditionality comes from the frame of collective leadership in which they engage with collective action. And, like their enemies the libs, they find this sense of leadership, in spoken assumption though it is, stimulating to their political thymos. Hence the pornography of the gun, in which anyone who owns such a piece of metal, probably never having fired it at anything living and certainly never anything human, considers himself already a soldier in a coming war. How different is this from finding the French resistance fighter in the suburban wine ant, ready to crawl around on the rails at night and plant a charge to derail the Nazi Trump train? Cringe, meet cringe. While still ensorcelled by this fantasy, they cannot possibly follow. Sure, they might, holding their noses a bit, vote for Trump. They're not even really voting for him, more for his agenda, which is to make America great again. Who could be against that? But their vote is still mostly an expression of sincere, but narcissistic, desire. They are not participating in some effective collective action. They are voting for themselves. Which means they are not delegating any serious power, and their votes do not work. So voting is a long way from installing some Trump app which lets him control you. Tell you what to do? Drag you around with his finger, like a dot on a screen? Dude, that's just weird. We're voting for our traditional freedoms, not weird techno-slavery. It is still we, the citizens of America, who are in charge. Or if we're not, we should be. The candidates we elect are our servants, not the other way around. We're not about to march about at their beck and call. We are free men who grill when we want to grill. And with all due respect to President Trump, if he thinks he can drag us around the map with his little finger, maybe Jeb Bush was right about everything. America is America because we're the revolutionary nation. We're the citadel of democracy. The libs say we's here to elect a dictator, but we know darn tootin' that's not true. We're just here to get our beautiful country restored, like a '76 Mustang we found in a barn. We're not here to abolish the Constitution. We're here to save it. We're here to restore those American freedoms we hold dear, for which Betsy Ross knitted, Benedict Arnold died, Sherman marched and brave Lieutenant Calley planted our flag at Iwo Jima. A love letter to the normies. Well, as Tyler Durden once put it, how's that working out for you? It's funny being an absolute monarchist. Everyone humors you, but you have to humor everyone. You have to let them pretend that the unilateral authority of a single manager, instead of being the normal operating procedure of any serious organization, big or small, in the real world today. Including Coinbase, Basecamp, Cirque du Soleil, Chez Panisse, Linux, the Lakers, every Carl's Jr. franchise, Van Halen and the CJNG Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Not to mention almost all regimes and governments in human history, outside the last 3.5 centuries of Anglo-American empire, is some kind of a bizarre, outre idea. Like turning all of Oregon's interstates into monorails. You could not possibly believe it yourself. You must be, in some sense, joking. And if you somehow convince an interlocutor that yes, you are serious, they seem to always have one question. But who gets to be king? I don't know, someone competent, hopefully? Who gets to be CEO of Apple? Not me, not you, and not some schmo. If you had ever been a CEO, or even a king, you might be asking a different question. But who has to be king? Your question more than anything demonstrates the citizen mentality. You are still in Lincoln's Lyceum. Distinction remains your paramount object. Without thinking about it, you conceive democracy as a mechanism for fairly distributing distinction. This is why you are so shocked by the idea of giving all the country's distinction to one person, without letting anyone else matter at all. You too are a creature of power. You too, of the family of the lion, and the tribe of the eagle. You will not be disinherited of this pedigree. Nor will you see anyone else so humiliated. Because this is America. You feel women should be able to vote, not because of some inductive or deductive logic which tells you that women can choose better government policies, but for two obvious reasons. First, it is obviously unfair not to distribute a distinction to women. Second, if only men vote, women will obviously be defeated in the battle of the sexes. Neither of these arguments seem slightly strange to you. This is fine. Every period has its peculiarities of mind. Neither, however, has much to do with governing well. While thinking about everything in this beautiful religious way, you may wonder why your government works so badly, or why you seem to have so little real power over it. The view of the monarchist, that madman and enemy of the people, who really means it and is not even joking, is that whatever is best administered is best. He views the government as a machine for governing, not a machine for distributing status. The less status moves around at all, the less everyone is trained to crave it, and the worst case of all is a population universally addicted to fictitious, pornographic rank and power. Yes, this is America. An amazing property. It has seen better days, we have seen the pictures. America, well managed, we cannot even imagine what it could become. Nor can we become it, until we overcome our addiction to distinction and importance, until we learn to live without constantly trying to change the world. In fact, the only power that can actually change the world is this very same power of the powerless. The art of neutrality, the detachment from political power and the desire for it, is one of the simplest and most difficult arts of character. Like voluntary celibacy, it violates the most basic human instincts. Those who learn it learn a superpower indeed, they learn how to follow. The art of following is the difference between an army and a mob, between a kingdom and a revolution. Once you can control your desire for power, you can effectively delegate your own power, which means you, and a crowd of people like you, can concentrate and focus your power. And levitate the Washington Monument, so to speak. The corporate revolution and its consequences. Of course, a company that becomes governed by its own message board is traveling in the opposite direction, from monarchy to oligarchy. One clear lesson of history is that every time this happens, it is an unforced error by the monarchy. When the office slack turns into the National Assembly, it is because the company, which ought to be an army and on its face is an army, whose org chart is a pyramid as perfect as Khufu's, has decided that what Castro called the sweet honey of power makes a good office perk to put on tap next to the iced coffee and kombucha. They might as well put in a heroin dispenser. What's the Keurig of heroin? And the next thing the CEO knows, he isn't even in charge. Does he feel in charge? Now the real CEO is some Bain, Jack Cade or Robespierre. Perhaps even someone anonymous, who talks anonymously to the press. If only it had been another flavor of kombucha. More than anything, the superpower that makes Silicon Valley more competent than Washington is the ability to operate as an army, by top-down command, not as a court, by process and procedure. To be a soldier is to be able to follow unconditionally. To be neutral is to approach the true power of the powerless, the power to follow. One leader with 1,000 followers is 1,000 times more powerful than 1,000 leaders. When the Chad is given power, it turns into an informal court, a court of mob justice, like the early Roman Forum or Athenian Agora. In that court, every employee is no longer a follower, but a leader. Who once tastes this honey will not soon lose the taste. But who does lose the taste has at least started to learn the power of the powerless. And to see the fruit of this revolution is to learn not to plant its seeds, a learning which is a seed itself, and can spread.